Well, good evening. It's a great pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Tomas Vенцлова to Ilia State University. I don't think that you need to be introduced to his work, but I still would like to say a couple of words. He was born in a year which brings the worst memories of the Soviet Union in 1937, and one could perhaps think it is a gesture of history which symbolically wanted to atone for all the victims of that year, that such a proponent of human freedom was born. He will be celebrating his 80th birthday this year, so all the more kind of a pleasure to welcome him here. He studied at Vilnius University, where he also taught, and he was the founder of Lithuanian Helsinki Group in 1976, and this is one important parallel to our Zviadgam Sakhurdia, the second being, of course, that he was the son of the classic of Lithuanian Soviet literature of the 20th century. But I have the feeling that there the parallels end and the differences begin. Well, he was forced to emigrate from the Soviet Union, and he was stripped of his Soviet citizenship. Actually, he was the 9th person to be stripped of citizenship. Trotsky and Solzhenitsyn preceding him in that honor. To describe his poetry, I just would like to quote his great friend Joseph Brodsky, and actually also his translator, who said that the tone of Tomas Vенцлова amazes us with his conscious, intentional monotony, as if concealing all too obvious drama of his existence. I don't think that I would be able to formulate it better than Brodsky. And of his many prosaic works, I would like to single out two. First, his absolutely brilliant book on Vilnius, one of the best books written on any city, actually, and his collection of studies in Russian literature, which I suppose can be translated as Interlocutors at a Feast, or Собеседники на перо, or on a feast, or during the feast, which is a very minute and detailed and very perceptive study of great poetic tradition of Russian literature. So here I would like to end my introduction and with great pleasure give floor to Tomas Vенцлова for his initial.
Ladies and gentlemen, I feel profoundly honored by the title awarded to me by the Ilia State University. And I would like to emphasize the name Ilia, Saint Ilia the writer, or Ilia Chevchevadze, a great Georgian writer and leader of the Georgian national revival, is well known in Lithuania and is known to me personally, and he is respected in our country on a par with our own writers and leaders of independence movement, such as Maironis or Vaižgantas, who were his contemporaries. I accept this honorary title as a link in the long history of Georgian-Lithuanian cultural relations. This starts, perhaps, with Georgi Eristavi, who was exiled to Vilnius, to the Lithuania's capital. At that time, it was just a gubernsky center. He was exiled by the Tsarist regime and brought the knowledge of Shota Rustaveli to the city. Rustaveli was translated into Polish with his help. Today we have also the full translation of the Night in the Panther's Skin into Lithuanian, done by Jonas Greičiūnas, for the sake not only of his own, but for many future generations. We also know, and I was happy to read, Nicholas Baratashvili, Vazhab Shavela, Galaktion Tabidze, Tizian Tabidze, and other preeminent classics of Georgian letters. And of course, we have always enjoyed brilliant Georgian cinema. On the other hand, our writer, Antanas Vienolis, has lived in Tbilisi in the early 20th century. And generations of our school children have enjoyed his Georgian legends. Perhaps it is not inappropriate to mention the fact that my late father, Antanas Venslova, had visited Georgia and made friends with such Georgian writers as Sandro Shanshishvili or Georgi Leonidze. I myself know Georgian mountains and cities reasonably well from my early youth. And in some of my early poems, are dedicated to Georgia. We belong to the same area of Mediterranean and European civilization, which has its roots in Christian civilization. Georgia has a magnificent medieval heritage, and our Lithuanian heritage of Grand Duchy of Lithuania is perhaps more modest, since Georgians embraced Christian faith much earlier. Still, our roots are similar, notwithstanding the profound differences in language, customs, folklore, or church traditions. On the occasion of this honorable award, let me express my hope, I would say my faith and my certainty, that both our countries will be always parts of democratic European world, and therefore will always maintain their identity and their age-old solidarity. Thank you.
We will conduct the ceremony of this robe giving or a little bit later, but now we have the possibility and to ask some questions to Tomas Venslowa, and I would like to use, and hopefully not abuse, my privilege as the moderator, first of all to ask the first question, if you don't mind. And the question of, you mentioned the European world, and the hope that both Lithuania and Georgia will be and remain part of it. I would like to ask you, in the light of recent developments in Europe, and of course by that especially meaning the developments in the European Union, but also the rise of populism, the rise of nationalism, what do you think about the future of Europe itself, of which we are to remain a part?
Well, there is a well-known Latin saying, dum spiro spero. Until I am alive, I hope. So I strongly hope, I hope that there is no other way for Europe to remain Europe, something strong, united and successful without European Union. Unfortunately, recently we see very dangerous developments in many countries, of course, it started with Vladimir Putin, with his nationalist and imperialist schedule, which he still follows. But even in Russia, it could change. It depends on time and on the efforts of population, not only in Russia itself, but also around Russia. But there are very, very unpleasant developments, for example, in Poland or in Hungary. Even in the United States, I must confess I am an American citizen as well as a Lithuanian citizen. Usually I don't want in the United States, I want in Lithuania, because I always believed that America will manage. Lithuania, not necessarily so. And so I vote in Lithuania always, but I voted twice recently in the United States, first for Barack Obama, because I considered it a matter of principle that a black person should be elected a president of America, because the difference, in my opinion, the difference because black skin and white skin are only as important as the difference between blonde hair and dark hair. So, and Barack Obama proved to be not the worst possible president, and thank God. Then I voted for Hillary Clinton, also for two reasons. Because she looked for me a more responsible person than Donald Trump, although, well, she has her own problems, but still she looks the more responsible of the two, and better prepared for leading a huge and important country. But there was also another reason for voting for her, because I think that, well, just like with Barack Obama, it's time for a woman to become a president of the United States. So she was not elected, which was, well, a sort of a shock for me. Donald Trump does not seem to be well prepared for his job, but we'll see. Seemingly he learned something in the course. Let's look and wait. But the developments in France, for example, are hope-inspiring, and I strongly hope that the European Union will be preserved and will be strengthened, and we will be part of a good European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, could I ask the audience? Yes. Yeah, please.
I have two questions. I hesitate where to start from. I will ask with more kind of mystical part. You spoke about solidarity between Georgia and Lithuania, which is in a way a natural thing for a Lithuanian poet being in Georgia, but I think there is some kind of special link between Lithuania and Georgia, which it's not always easy for me to explain. For instance, it's an interesting indicator is that in Eurovision Song Festival, Lithuanians always give the first place to a Georgian singer, whether it's a good singer or bad singer, does not matter. And of course, politically, Lithuania has been especially, dedicated, and we have a group of friends, let's say it's Poland and Baltic countries, some others, Romanians maybe, but Lithuania always stood out. So its sense of solidarity was always stronger and sort of more emotional. So I don't understand why there is such a such link, not just among intellectuals, whatever poets, but also in a regular population. Why there is some kind of myth of Georgia in Lithuania?
Of myth of Georgia?
Yes.
Well, you know, in the Soviet period, there was a double, so to speak, double situation. For us, Georgia was almost a free country in our imagination. It probably was not, but in our imagination it looked so. Because whenever one crossed the chain of the Caucasian Mountains, one found himself or herself in a totally different milieu, which was, it was reasonably rich, even in the Soviet period, which was very cheerful, which was very nice, yes, in any sense, very patriotic. And we used to say, well, Georgia is a very strange country. There is virtually no Soviet power there. Although that was probably optical, sort of optical illusion, yes. The same probably for Georgians with Lithuanians. Lithuania was considered a Western country where one can communicate with the West more freely, where Western fashions, Western music, Western culture, Western literature leak especially from Poland, and different civilization, different style of architecture. I think for Georgians, Lithuania also was the same gulp of freedom, like Georgia for us. That was also to some degree an optical illusion. But we know very well that both countries were among the leaders in the independence or separatist, if you want, movement in the Soviet Union. And Lithuania was the real leader because it declared its independence earlier than anybody else. But Georgia was also extremely important in that movement. And I can add that, well, I was presented here as a leader or founder of the Lithuanian Helsinki group, which is an overstatement. I was only one of the five founding members. And the real leader was Viktor Spatkus, who unfortunately now has passed away. But there was also a Helsinki group in Georgia, as everybody knows. And those two groups just did their job as well as they could and helped that movement. So there is a sort of elective affinity, as Goethe says, between Georgia and Lithuania. I would say that even in the 19th century, our problems and our developments were similar to a degree, which I tried even to mention in my opening speech. Thank you.
So there was a second question.
I had a second question, which is a little bit similar to our rector's first question, but not exactly the same. Okay, we spoke about this history, let's say so, of Soviet-Lithuanian relations, but now Lithuania, as well as other kind of former communist countries which are now part of the Soviet Union, is also a role model, which kind of paved the way, and we are sort of a little bit late, but we try to do the same. And in general, also in the West, this region was considered sort of success story, that it was a communist countries, and then they became democracies and market economies and joined European Union and joined NATO, and everything is fine. But somehow, of late, last 4, 5, 6 years, people started to raise alarm bells, especially with Hungary, that it's becoming more autocratic, and now there are fears about Poland, and these countries who were so happy to join European Union in 2004 became somewhat Eurosceptic. And why do you think that's happening exactly in those countries, I mean former communist countries, who were so happy about becoming European or returning to Europe? And we don't hear anything alarming about Lithuania, but do you think that there are some kind of tendencies similar to Poland? I mean, Poland and Lithuania are historically and culturally so close that could may push Lithuania in the same direction.
I understand. Thank you. Well, Lithuania and Poland are historically close, but at the same time there were perceptible tensions between Poland and Lithuania throughout the 19th and especially throughout the 20th century. We had the problem of our capital, Vilnius. Vilnius was taken by Poland in the year 1920 and was a part of Poland for approximately 20 years, which is not necessarily astonishing because the population in Vilnius was mainly Polish-speaking. Lithuanians made a minority. But I always explain the situation why Vilnius is Lithuanian for the same reason as Jerusalem is Jewish. This is the city which was always the very center of the national aspirations, and without Vilnius, Lithuania simply does not exist, as the Jewish people don't exist without Jerusalem. So, but today's tendencies in Poland, nationalist tendencies in Kaczynski's Poland are a bit frightening to us, but not necessarily very much pronounced at present in relation to Lithuania. They are probably more pronounced in relation to Ukraine. No, well, why it happened? Well, and we have some, even in today's Lithuanian political scene, there are some Eurosceptic and isolationist and xenophobic tendencies which are unacceptable, at least for me, but not only for me, for many, many citizens of Lithuania. They are. Why it happens? First of all, there is a strong force of historical inertia. Some anachronistic categories coming back to the 19th century are still present in our mentality. Secondly, the hopes after joining the European Union and NATO and so on were probably too high. They were overstated. And people are frustrated when, well, and yes, when the hopes did not always materialize in the way the people expected. So people look for change, and they are finding the change in dubious political doctrines. Now, moreover, there is a problem of social, how to say it? Yes, there are simply social problems. Some people became extremely rich, and some people became, yes, some people remained in a rather shabby state, to say the least, and that also results in, I would say, dubious political tendencies. I hope, well, generally speaking, Lithuania is a success story. Lithuanians now live much better than any time before, including the interwar independence period, which is an ideal state for many, still an ideal state for many. But now it is better. Now we have real democracy. We did not have it in the interwar period. And also, culturally, we are also closer to the European and world standards than we were even during the independence period, to say nothing about the Soviet period. So I still hope. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you. It's indeed a great honor and pleasure to have you here at the Ilia State University. The world has become definitely smaller since the figure like you can just visit Georgia and our university and also become the honorary member of our community. I want to throw you back to 1970s and 80s, on the time of your emigration in the United States from the Soviet Union. This is the time when you, together with Czesław Milosz, became the voice for our own nations. From today's perspective, everybody agrees that you represented your nations, the nations under Soviet subjugation, to the Western world, while Georgian writers of the same generation as yours did not choose that path. They did not apply to the Western integrity, Western community with that voice to represent their own nations. And it was also notable for me that when you mentioned Georgian writers, and it was really a pleasure to hear so many Georgian writers which are apparently known to you. When you mentioned them, these were all Georgian writers with the heritage of modernist period from 1910s, 1920s, with which then survived 1937 Great Purge. They were still for you, I guess, for the Lithuanian poet, representatives of Georgian nation, Georgian community, while people from your generation, they stayed isolated in our reality. They stayed tete-a-tete with Georgian readers community, but they did not try to represent our country, our nation to the rest of the world. Can you just assess that I mean, differences from your perspective. How was your intention when emigrating to the United States? Did you really realize that you have had that mission of representing old nation to the free world?
Well, first of all, we Lithuanians always had a very considerable and very important emigre literary community. There were dozens, if not hundreds, of good writers still working in the United States and also in Europe, even in Australia. I knew that. It was not necessarily known to everybody in Lithuania in its entirety, but we knew that we have this another literature, which was probably not necessarily the case of Georgia. I am not very well versed in Georgian, in the history of Georgian letters, but I think, and I know only those 20th century writers who were active in Soviet Georgia. But I think among them were good writers and talented writers, and I think that most of the Georgians would agree with me. But the same with Lithuania. There were not bad and talented writers who made their mark on Lithuanian letters in the Soviet Lithuania. But we always had this another voice, another strong voice. There were publishing houses, there were magazines, there were writers' meetings. They tried to do their best in representing Lithuania before the Western public, such as Ladauskas, Nyka Niliūnas, Oraistis, and many, many others. I could enumerate them without end. Then, well, in a sense, I was forced to emigrate. I was forced to emigrate because after my father's death and when my dissident views became more pronounced, they just stopped any publication of my work, including translations. I could not make my living by cultural work. And that was sort of something impossible for me. So I wrote a letter to the Central Committee of the Lithuanian Communist Party. It was an open letter because it leaked to the West with my help and was printed in many Western newspapers, magazines, and so on. Thank you. Saying that since I cannot do my job for which I believe I was born, I cannot do that job successfully in Lithuania, I ask for permission to emigrate according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and to the Soviet law. Well, it was difficult. Most of the people in Lithuania understood this letter as a letter of a crazy person, which it was probably. But at the end, they threw me out of the Soviet Union. I was not alone in that respect. There were several such people. Yes, at least several such people. They threw me out. And when I reached the Western world, I found this literary, so to speak, infrastructure. Yes, and could work, could publish, could teach, could join the academic world. Czesław Miłosz and Joseph Brodsky were very helpful in that respect. And definitely we made a sort of a group representing their own countries outside of their own countries, because the countries itself could not express their, could not express themselves freely. So Miłosz spoke for Poland, Brodsky spoke for Russia, And I, well, tried to do my best to speak for Lithuania, but I was not alone in that respect. And also some of my friends, for example, Marcelius Martinaitis, who remained in Lithuania, but who never condemned me for my decision to leave the country. Marcelius Martinaitis did the same in Lithuania, but of course within the limits of the Soviet censorship, which presented a problem, of course.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just to return to the question of special attitudes between the Georgian and Lithuanian nations, it's excellent actually that when you travel to Lithuania or Lithuanians come to Georgia, I mean, you feel this very special smiles on the faces of the people, and also a lot of intellectuals these days go to and forth strengthening these ties. But my question to you is, what will be your advice or recommendations to the state of Lithuania and state of Georgia, how to strengthen these special attitudes and special ties, how to make it more, how to popularize the culture of Georgia and Lithuania on each other's faces more effectively? Because I think that what we have now is more remaining from the past, but this needs to be maintained. So it's not guarantees that in 10 years' time we will have the same attitude. So,
Thank you. Well, this is not necessarily a question for me. This is a question for the Lithuanian embassy in Tbilisi and for the Georgian embassy in Vilnius, and for the cultural organizations in both countries. But the ties should be strengthened because we have very similar problems, and to some degree we have similar past, and to a perceptive degree we have similar traditions. So the Georgian experience is interesting for Lithuanians, and I believe Lithuanian experience could be interesting for Georgians. So, well, it's a pity, but it seems that we were better informed about the situation in Georgia and about Georgian culture during the Soviet period than now. Well, that should be improved. but I cannot take personal part in that for a very simple reason that I don't know Georgian language. And, but, for example, I am pretty sure that there should be people who learn Georgian, probably groups, probably some work should be done in our universities for learning Georgian language, and vice versa, for learning Lithuanian language here in Georgia. I knew only one Georgian who spoke very good Lithuanian. He was a mathematician, and but if there were 20 persons in Georgia who spoke good Lithuanian, that would be better than now. And, yeah, and of course, vice versa. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Many intellectuals of your generation in the Soviet Union, and Joseph Brodsky among them, who happened to be your friend, had a kind of ideal perception of the West. The Western world was associated with freedom of thought, with freedom of expression. I was reading now the memoirs of Brodsky, the moment when he's leaving, so when he's forced to leave the Soviet Union, and when he's landing in Vienna, carrying in his suitcase a bottle of Lithuanian vodka you gave him for Odin. And he describes his feelings as kind of empty. So the change does not feel as real breakthrough, as a real change of things. So maybe I will have a similar question. So what do you felt when you went to the West? How did your perception change, and how it affected your writing? So did you start to write in another style about other topics? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, yes, Brodsky left the Soviet Union, bringing for Odin, bringing a bottle of Russian. Well, it's not vodka exactly, but it is something very, very strong, and Lithuanian. Yes, left the Soviet Union, bringing with him Lithuanian, very strong Lithuanian drink, bottle of drink. That bottle was given by myself. That was my present for Oden, whom I translated. I even got a letter from Oden with some thanks for that translation. I still translate Oden from time to time. And Brodsky wrote me a short card saying that, well, we drank that bottle together. Recently, we were together with my wife, who is present in this room. We visited the village in Austria where Oden lived. There is a sort of a very private Oden's museum in one room. And there are several empty bottles standing there. I looked for my bottle, but I did not find it. But definitely there were hundreds of other bottles which did not find their way to the museum. So Brodsky was a bit lost when he found himself in the West. And, well, generally he was bound to feel emptiness everywhere where he went to. But he was helped by Czesław Miłosz. Czesław Miłosz wrote him a letter, which in Brodsky's words was the most important letter he ever got. Miłosz said something like that, well, some people don't manage it, some people do manage it. It depends on you. And there is a myth that a poet cannot write without his native roots, without his native soil, his native language, without native landscape around him or her. And Miłosz referred to that myth in his letter, and generally speaking, this myth is disproved. Has been disproved many times. In Polish literature by Adam Mickiewicz, by Cyprian Norwid, by Miłosz himself, by Gombrowicz, by many writers. In Russian literature by Herzen, for example, by Tsvetaeva, by Khodasevich, by Bunin, if you want, by many important writers. In Lithuania, we had this big emigre literary community, which definitely disproved the myth. So Brodsky also disproved the myth. He found his way in America, and that's as a very successful literary person. I tried to follow him. Of course, I am much less successful and much less known, but I tried also to do my best. Thank you. Time is, yes.
Okay, so with a great pleasure, I would like to say that the Academic Council of Ilia State University has decided to award honorary degree to Tomas Vенцлова for his contribution to modern literature and his fight for freedom. And this is a great pleasure to conduct this small ceremony now.
Always the same.
Yes? Well, we can, if you don't.
Yes, please.
We just can.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
This is your head, and I hope that